I wasn't on the guest list for any of my siblings' weddings, so when it came time for mine, I figured I'd return the favor. I have 4 older siblings, all married, and not one of them thought to include me in their big day. Their reasoning? Each of them opted for a child-free ceremony. I had assumed, maybe foolishly, that I'd be an exception since I was their sister, but I was wrong. Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today I want to share another touching story with you. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, it motivates us to create more quality content for you. Let's continue. The first wedding was my oldest brother Leo's. He was the first to get married, and his wedding set the tone for the rest, no kids allowed. I was only 10 at the time, so I understood their logic, but that didn't stop me from feeling hurt. He married a woman I genuinely liked, yet I didn't get to witness any of it. Then, when my next brother, Frank, tied the knot, I was 12. Once again, I wasn't invited. This time, though, it stung a little more because I knew I wasn't some unruly child who would cause trouble. I was well-behaved, quiet, and capable of sitting through a ceremony without making a scene, but none of that seemed to matter. When my sister Beth got married, I was 15, and for a brief moment, I thought things might be different. Initially, she planned on having an open wedding, but eventually, the family convinced her that excluding all kids would be simpler. I remember asking her if she'd at least make an exception for me since I was 15, not quite a child, not quite an adult, but she shut me down. She told me it wouldn't be fair to the other kids. That was the last straw for me. I was furious and yelled at her, telling her it wasn't fair that I had to miss out on every one of my siblings' weddings. My parents didn't take kindly to my outburst. They were so mad they grounded me for 6 months. By the time my youngest brother, Gabe, got married, I was 17, and honestly, I had given up caring. I already knew how this would go, another child-free wedding, another exclusion, so I didn't even bother asking. And sure enough, I wasn't invited. What made it worse was that my cousin, who had literally just turned 18, got an invitation. Me? Nothing. At that point, I didn't let it get to me. I sent Gabe a brief congratulatory message and moved on, ignoring everything else about his wedding. My parents weren't happy about that either. They thought I should have been more enthusiastic, but I just shut them out and spent most of my time with my fiancé. Now, as I'm preparing for my own wedding, I made a decision: I'm not inviting any of my siblings. If they didn't think I was important enough to be there for their weddings, then I don't see why they should be at mine. When they realized they hadn't received invitations, the family group chat lit up with questions. Beth wondered if something had gone wrong with the mail, and Frank didn't beat around the bush, he straight up asked why he hadn't been invited. I saw their messages, read them carefully, then decided to let them sit there unanswered. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of a quick response. The next morning, my phone rang before I even had a chance to fully wake up. It was my mom. I knew why she was calling, and I almost didn't answer. But a part of me wanted to get it over with, so I picked up. The second I said hello, she skipped right past the pleasantries and went straight for the interrogation. Why didn't you invite your siblings? Her voice was sharp, laced with anger, like I'd committed some unforgivable crime. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Because they didn't invite me to their weddings, I said simply. I figured it was only fair. For a moment, silence stretched between us. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to process my words. Then, just as I expected, she exploded. This isn't you, Megan. This isn't how I raised you. Did your fiancé put this idea in your head? Her voice cracked with disbelief. You've always been such a sweet girl, but lately, I barely recognize you. I nearly laughed, not out of amusement, but because of how predictable she was. My mother had this habit of blaming other people when she didn't want to acknowledge the real issue. Instead of accepting that I had my own feelings, my own reasons, she'd rather believe someone else had corrupted me. It's not about him, Mom, I said, keeping my voice steady. This is my decision. They never made me feel important enough to include me in their biggest moments, so I don't see why I should include them in mine." She didn't say another word. Instead, she hung up. Classic mom. If she couldn't control the conversation, she'd rather end it. The next day, the messages started rolling in. First, it was Leo. His was the most dramatic, as expected. "Megan, I know you were upset about not being invited to my wedding, but you were just a kid. It wasn't personal. I thought you would have gotten over it by now." I stared at my phone, my blood slowly starting to simmer. Gotten over it? Was he serious? They had excluded me from some of the biggest milestones of their lives, over and over, and now I was just supposed to get over it like it was nothing? I typed out my response, my fingers moving fast. "It's not about getting over it. It's about fairness. If I wasn't important enough to be at your weddings, why should you be at mine? Seems pretty fair to me." His reply came almost instantly, and it was even more ridiculous than I expected. "You're being a spoiled brat. Family should always come before resentment." Now they wanted to act like we were this tight-knit family. Like we were supposed to put each other first, no matter what. Where was that energy when I was a little girl begging to be included in their weddings? Where was the so-called closeness when I spent years feeling like an afterthought? I didn't bother replying. There was no point. But things escalated when my parents decided to show up at my house unannounced. I opened the door to find them standing there, arms crossed, their expressions heavy with disappointment. They didn't ask if they could come in. They just walked past me like they had every right to be there. I sighed, bracing myself. "So, what is this? Some kind of intervention?" My mom folded her arms. "We need to talk some sense into you before you embarrass yourself, and us." There it was. That was what really mattered to them. Not my feelings. Not the years of exclusion. Just appearances. "What will people think, Megan?" she continued, her voice rising. "What kind of person doesn't invite their own siblings to their wedding?" She spoke like I had committed some great offense. Like I was the villain in all of this. I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom, this isn't about what other people think. This is about all the years you ignored how much it hurt me. I tried explaining this to you on the phone, but my dad cut me off before I could finish. His tone was sharp, dismissive. This is childish, Megan. You're being selfish. Selfish. That was rich coming from them. I looked between them, waiting, hoping, for even a hint of understanding. But there was none. There never was. I exhaled slowly, already exhausted by the conversation. You know what? I don't want to have this argument again. I walked to the door and held it open. They stared at me, stunned, but after a tense moment, my mom scoffed and grabbed her purse. Unbelievable, she muttered as she walked past me. My dad followed, shaking his head in disappointment like I was some kind of lost cause. As soon as they were gone, I closed the door, pressing my back against it. I let out a slow breath, my hands slightly shaking from frustration. If they thought showing up unannounced would make me change my mind, they were dead wrong. That was the moment I lost my patience. Up until then, I had been trying to stay calm, trying to explain my reasoning in a way they might understand. But my dad calling me childish and selfish was too much. It was like every ounce of frustration, every bottled-up emotion I had carried for years, suddenly overflowed. I took a step forward, my voice steady but sharp. Childish and selfish? I repeated, my eyes narrowing. I was actually a child when I begged to go to their weddings, and you all told me I was being dramatic. You told me to get over it. And now that I'm an adult, you want to pretend none of that ever happened? That it was no big deal? I scoffed, shaking my head. I'm sorry, but I'm not changing my mind. They're not coming to my wedding, and if you keep treating me like this, neither will you. The room went dead silent. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. My mom's face went pale, like she might faint, while my dad's turned bright red with anger. I thought he was about to say something, maybe yell, but instead, he clenched his jaw and stormed toward the door. My mom followed, looking at me like I had just broken her heart into pieces. But I didn't care. Not this time. They didn't say another word. They just left, slamming the door behind them so hard that the walls shook. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Part of me expected to feel guilty, to feel that creeping shame that always came when I upset them. But instead, I just felt relieved. That relief didn't last long. Over the next few weeks, my parents made it their personal mission to make me feel like the worst daughter in the world. They called me spiteful and ungrateful whenever they had the chance, painting me as some kind of villain to anyone who would listen. My siblings weren't much better. They bombarded me with messages, trying to guilt me into changing my mind. Frank insisted I was ruining the family. Beth, always the one to use emotions as a weapon, told me that my nephews had been so excited about my wedding, and that it would be cruel to leave them out. This time, I didn't even bother responding. Then, finally, my wedding day arrived. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly free. The ceremony was perfect. Exactly the way I had dreamed. There was no tension, no awkwardness, no walking on eggshells to avoid unnecessary drama. Just love, pure, simple, and real. I was surrounded by people who actually cared about me, who were there because they wanted to be, not because they felt obligated. As I danced with my husband, laughter bubbling from my lips, I thought about how this was what happiness felt like. This was peace. This was control over my own life. It wasn't until later that I found out my mother had staged her own little protest. She had apparently organized a separate dinner for my siblings on the same day as my wedding, as if to make some kind of statement. A pathetic, silent rebellion. When I heard about it, I actually laughed. Let them comfort themselves however they wanted. It wouldn't change a damn thing. They could sit in a restaurant, whispering about how I had abandoned the family, but for the first time in my life, I had stood up for myself. And it felt liberating. After the wedding, I thought maybe, just maybe, things would finally settle down. It felt like a turning point. Like a fresh start. Everything about that day had been beautiful. The flowers, the music, the food, the people. It was genuine love. I didn't feel the absence of anyone who wasn't there. If anything, I felt lighter without them. But, as always, peace never lasted. A few days later, the comments started. It began subtly, little passive-aggressive remarks in the family group chat. At first, I ignored them, but they slowly chipped away at my patience. Beth was the first to strike. We saw some pictures of your wedding. Why did those flowers look so basic? I rolled my eyes and locked my phone, determined not to let her get under my skin. But then Frank chimed in. And the venue? I don't know. It looked more like an impromptu party than a wedding. You could have asked us for help. I froze. How the hell had they seen the pictures? I had blocked all of them from my social media. I had made sure they wouldn't have access to anything. But, of course, they had their ways. It turned out they had gotten the photos through mutual friends, digging around, prying into my life, even though they had no place in it anymore. That realization made my blood boil. Even when they weren't invited, even when I had made it clear that I wanted distance, they still found a way to insert themselves into my happiness. And I had a feeling this wasn't over yet. Not only had they invaded a moment I had deliberately excluded them from, but now they were picking it apart like critics at a show they weren't even invited to. The hypocrisy of it all made my stomach churn. They had gone out of their way to see something that wasn't meant for them, and instead of just moving on with their lives, they felt entitled to pick it apart, to belittle something deeply personal to me. I clenched my jaw, inhaling slowly through my nose, forcing myself not to respond. I had promised myself that I wouldn't let them get under my skin, that I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of knowing they'd upset me. But God, was it hard? Then came the final blow. My phone rang, and when I saw my mom's name on the screen, I just knew, this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. For a brief second, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but part of me wanted to hear what she had to say, to see just how far she'd go. So, against my better judgment, I answered. She didn't even bother with small talk. No hello, no how are you, no attempt at pretending she called for any reason other than to tear me down. The first words out of her mouth were sharp and dripping with disapproval. What was that wedding? I saw the pictures, and honestly, I expected more from you. I felt my grip tighten around my phone. Everything looked so simple. Nothing like your siblings' weddings. And that dress? Megan, you deserved something more glamorous. Why didn't you have it in a church? Your sister had something much nicer. That wedding didn't seem worthy of our family. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. Not because I agreed, God, no, but because I was floored by how openly rude she was. There was no attempt to sugarcoat it, no subtlety. Just pure, unfiltered judgment. I pressed my lips together, forcing down the anger bubbling in my chest. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady, but cold. Mom, the only thing that wasn't worthy here was you. The silence on the other end was sharp. But I wasn't done. You weren't even invited, yet you feel entitled to criticize my wedding? You went out of your way to see pictures of something you weren't supposed to see, and now you have the audacity to complain? If you didn't like it, fine. Because, trust me, I didn't plan a single thing with you in mind. Her sharp inhale came through the phone, and I could practically feel her fury, but she wasn't backing down. You're being so selfish, Megan. Really? Do you think you can just cut us out of your life like this? That's not normal. You've always been resentful, and now you're taking it out on us. What did we do to deserve this? That was it. That was the last straw. I sat up straighter, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. What did you do? I repeated, my voice low, steady, but laced with anger. Let's refresh our memories, Mom. I didn't even give her a chance to respond before continuing. You ignored me during the most important moments of my life. You made me feel like I didn't matter. I begged to go to my siblings' weddings, and every single time, I was brushed aside like an afterthought. But now that the roles are reversed, you expect me to pretend none of that happened? To welcome you with open arms, like it was never an issue? That's hypocrisy. And the most ironic part? The only thing that could have ruined my wedding was inviting you. Dead silence. For a second, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, she had finally understood. That she had taken in my words, processed them, and realized how deeply they had hurt me over the years. But, of course, I was giving her too much credit. She let out a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was laced with contempt. You're ungrateful. I felt my stomach drop, but I didn't say a word. We did everything for you, Megan. And this is how you repay us? You're abandoning your family for a man who barely just came into your life. You'll regret this. I didn't even hesitate. I hung up before she could say another word. I sat there, my phone still clutched in my hand, my chest rising and falling in deep, uneven breaths. My mind screamed at me to cry, to break down, to let out the frustration. But I didn't. I wouldn't give her, or anyone, the satisfaction of making me feel like I was the villain. I was done arguing with someone who would never admit their mistakes. But, of course, the drama didn't stop there. It didn't take long for my siblings to go on the offensive. I knew it was coming. My mom had clearly rallied them together, stoking their anger, feeding their sense of betrayal until they exploded. The messages started pouring in. At first, they were subtle jabs, thinly veiled attempts to make me feel guilty. Then, as the hours passed, they became more direct, more vicious. Beth was the first to strike in the family group chat. You've destroyed this family, Megan. Congratulations on pushing away everyone who ever loved you. I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Loved me? Was that what she called years of exclusion, criticism, and indifference? Then Frank, never one to miss an opportunity for dramatics, followed up with something even worse. I hope the husband you chose is worth it. Because you've lost everything for him. I could practically hear his smug, condescending tone as I read it. Across the room, my husband sat quietly, watching me with concern. He didn't say anything, didn't tell me what to do, but I could feel the silent support in his gaze. He knew this hurt me, knew the weight of years of family tension was pressing down on me all at once. But he also knew I had to handle it in my own way. I exhaled slowly, my heart pounding, my mind racing through all the things I wanted to say. I could have told them how they had abandoned me long before I ever chose to walk away. I could have reminded them that this wasn't about my husband, it was about them and the years of exclusion they had forced me to endure. But I didn't. Instead, I just left the group chat without saying a word. I wasn't going to waste my energy explaining myself to people who had never once considered my feelings. Let them sit there and stew in their self-righteous outrage. The next few days were exhausting. My phone was constantly buzzing with private messages and missed calls, each one a new attempt to drag me back into their toxic cycle. I ignored them all. Then my mom showed up at my door unannounced. I should have expected it, but still, when I opened the door and saw her standing there, arms crossed, lips pursed in anger, my stomach twisted. I didn't let her in. "Mom," I said firmly, blocking the doorway, "there's no point in this. You only know how to criticize and belittle me. I don't want any more of that in my life." She scoffed, her face twisting with frustration. "Family is forever, Megan," she yelled, her voice sharp with desperation. "You can't just eliminate us because you're hurt." I sighed, gripping the edge of the door. I didn't want to keep arguing. I didn't want to keep justifying myself to someone who had never once tried to see things from my perspective. But I wanted to make one thing very clear. I opened the door just a little wider, just enough so she could see the resolve in my face. Family should mean support, respect, and love, not manipulation and constant criticism. If that's all you have to offer, then yes, I can eliminate you from my life. I paused, letting the words sink in before adding, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. Then I closed the door. She kept yelling, her voice muffled through the wood, but I didn't listen. I didn't need to. My decision was already made. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. Since that day, I've completely cut off contact with them. At first, they tried to reach out, small, calculated attempts to drag me back in. But every message was just another accusation, another bitter remark disguised as concern. I stopped reading them. I refused to let them control me any longer. My life is different now. It's peaceful. It's mine. I don't feel lost anymore. I don't feel like I owe anything to people who never truly valued me. I wake up each morning feeling lighter, knowing that I've built a new life, one that is full of love and respect and genuine happiness. Everything my so-called family never gave me. And now, my husband and I are focused on our future. We've built something solid together, something that doesn't require walking on eggshells or constantly seeking approval. Then, something incredible happened. A few weeks ago, I found out I was pregnant. The moment I saw the test result, a flood of emotions rushed through me, joy, excitement, and, strangely, relief. This was a new beginning, a chance to create a family built on love, not obligation. For the first time in my life, I'm not looking back. I'm looking forward. The moment I saw the positive result, my breath hitched, and my hands trembled as I stared at the little test stick in disbelief. Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring the two pink lines that would change my life forever. I hadn't realized I was crying until my husband gently pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly it felt like he was trying to protect me from the weight of the emotions crashing over me. "We're going to raise this baby with so much love," he whispered into my hair, his voice full of promise. "They'll never want for anything, not love, not kindness, not security. We'll give them everything we never had." I clung to him, feeling an overwhelming mix of joy and relief. This child, our child, would never know what it was like to feel unwanted, to be cast aside, to be treated like an afterthought. From the very start, my husband and I knew our baby would only be surrounded by people who truly cherished them. That meant there was no place for my family in their life. I thought, perhaps naively, that cutting them out would be simple now. That after all this time, they would have finally let me go. But, as always, news traveled fast. I wasn't sure how they found out. Maybe through a distant relative, maybe through some mutual acquaintance who didn't realize, or didn't care, that I wanted nothing to do with them. But soon enough, the messages started. The first one came from my mom. "Megan, I heard you're pregnant. I want you to know that despite everything, we're your family. It's important for the baby to have their grandparents around." I stared at the message, feeling nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just exhaustion. I didn't reply. My husband and I had already made our decision. They had made their choices years ago when they excluded me time and time again. It wasn't about punishing them. It wasn't about being cruel. It was about protecting my child from the toxic cycle I had been trapped in for most of my life. Then the floodgates opened. Beth, true to form, tried to manipulate me in the most passive-aggressive way possible. "Congratulations on the pregnancy, Megan. Despite all the fights, we're siblings, and I know you'll need support. We're here for you and the baby." I could practically hear the insincerity dripping from her words. Then came Frank. He, of course, was more blunt. "Hold on to your grudge if you want, but at least let us meet our nephew. He deserves to know he has a big family." As if they had ever acted like family to me. As if I was the one keeping something from them instead of simply protecting what was mine. I sat in silence, my phone buzzing relentlessly in my hands, my mind reeling with everything they were saying. My husband sat beside me, watching, waiting. He could see it was affecting me, even if I wasn't saying anything. After a moment, he reached for my hand and squeezed it gently. "You don't have to reply," he said softly, his eyes full of understanding. "You don't owe them anything. This is our moment. And the only people who matter are the ones who actually care about us." I let out a shaky breath and nodded. He was right. So I did nothing. I didn't reply to a single message. I didn't give them the reaction they were waiting for. I let their words sit there, unanswered, while I moved forward with my life. But of course, my mother wasn't satisfied with silence. A week later, she showed up at my house unannounced. The moment I opened the door and saw her standing there, something in my chest tightened. She looked different. Not angry, not cold, but almost desperate. Like she wanted me to believe she was full of regret. For a split second, my heart clenched. But I knew better. Before she could even get a word out, I met her gaze and said, "Mom, don't insist. You're not a part of my life, and you won't be a part of my child's life either." She blinked, taken aback, before quickly recovering. "Megan, you can't do this. We're your family. This baby is part of us too." I exhaled slowly, keeping my voice calm but firm. "I'm not going to let my child go through what I went through. I want them to grow up surrounded by real love. Without manipulation. Without constant criticism. Without the emotional games you and the others never failed to play. That's something you don't know how to give. And I refuse to let my child suffer because of it." She started to cry. Big, heavy, theatrical sobs. But I knew those tears. They weren't regret. They weren't self-awareness finally settling in. They were frustration. She was crying because she wasn't getting what she wanted. I felt nothing. Before she could launch into another attempt at making me feel guilty, I stepped back and quietly shut the door in her face. It was painful, yes. But it was necessary. Since then, the messages and calls have continued. Little attempts at wearing me down, trying to make me second-guess myself. But they don't affect me anymore. My focus now is on my family. My husband, my baby, the life we're building together. A life free of drama. A life filled with love and security. Some people might say I'm being selfish. That I'm robbing my child of knowing their extended family. But I don't see it that way. To me, this is protection. I won't allow my child to be surrounded by people who only know how to manipulate, criticize, and tear others down. I won't let them feel like they have to earn love, like they have to fight to be included. I won't let history repeat itself. And for the first time in my life, I feel at peace with my decision. I don't feel guilty. I don't feel regret. I feel free. My family can say whatever they want. They can blame me, call me heartless, paint me as the villain in their story. I don't care. Because this is my life now. And for the first time ever, I'm the one in control. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. Share this video with your loved ones, it might brighten their day or give them a new perspective. And before you go, check out the video on your screen. It's another heartfelt story you won't want to miss.